Joan's memory will remain for a very long time. The qualities of human courage, fortitude, endurance, that is really what's made her reputation. She's absolutely exceptional, remarkable figure.
Why is the church so worried about a tiny hair sample from the year 1429? The answer lies in a genetic secret that could change how we see the birth of a nation. Joan of Arc was a hero, a martyr, and a saint, but she might have also been a royal bastard with a very specific brain disorder.
Crime scene investigation, using a whole range of different experts, many different methods of analysis to determine whether, in this case, relics belong to Joan of Arc.
Scientists are using the latest technology to sequence her hair, and the details are starting to shock everyone. It has been missing for years, but this key detail can shock the world. Hands down, this is the biggest mystery in French history. Buried royal truths. Joan of Arc is a name that will be remembered for a very long time. The qualities of human courage and strength are really what made her reputation stay alive. She is an absolutely special and remarkable figure in our past. Just imagine a 19-year-old girl who could not read leading an army of hardened fighters. She claimed to hear the voices of angels telling her exactly where to place big guns for battle. It is the most famous story in medieval history. But for 600 years, we have been missing one big thing, which is the physical proof. Now, with the newest genome sequencing, researchers are hunting for the DNA of Joan of Arc. The Roman Catholic Church even had remains examined to see if they could tell if they were her bones. They are looking for genetic markers that explain the voices and the visions. They are also looking for a secret royal family line that the kings and queens tried to hide. The history books say she was a peasant from a small village. The DNA might say she was actually a queen. This is what some call genetic heresy. So here is the deal. When we talk about her, we usually picture the stained glass window version. We see the shiny silver armor and the white banner flying in the wind. We see the tragic ending in the town square of Rouen. We see the saint. But lately, researchers have been trying to see the human. And not just the human, but the biology. For decades, there has been a quiet and high-stakes race to find a biological sample of the Maid of Orleans. It sounds impossible because the English wanted her gone completely. They burned her body not once, but 3 times just to make sure there were no parts for people to worship. They threw her ashes into the river. Basically, they wanted to delete her from existence. But history is messy and things have a way of surviving. For a long time, the scientific community and the church thought we had nothing left. But that changed when researchers started looking closer at the letters she told people to write for her. Joan could not write her own name. She was a girl from a village called Domremy, but she told people what to say in dozens of letters during her time in the army. These were urgent military notes sent to kings and enemy generals. On the bottom of some of those letters, there are wax seals. Old red wax was pressed down by a human thumb to make sure the letter was real. Trapped in that wax is a fingerprint and maybe a hair. This is where things get even crazier. If you can get DNA from a hair trapped in a seal from 1429, you are not just looking at an old object. You are looking at a medical chart. You are looking at the genetic blueprint of a woman who changed the world. But getting this DNA is a total nightmare. The letters are kept in high-security rooms in France. They are priceless treasures. You cannot just scrape the wax off to see if there is a hair inside. You have to use special pictures that look through the wax without touching it. And even if you find a hair, taking the DNA destroys the sample forever. You only get one shot. If you mess it up, you have destroyed a piece of history for nothing. And let us be real, the hair might not even be hers. It could belong to the man who wrote the letter. It could belong to the messenger who rode the horse. It is a genetic needle in a haystack. But the tiny chance that we could find the DNA of Joan of Arc is driving scientists wild. Because if we do, we open a box of questions that the church might not want answered. If scientists find the code in that hair, they are not looking for holiness. They are looking for a gene called LGI1 or signs of something called epilepsy. Modern doctors have a theory that her voices were actually sounds caused by a brain problem. If the DNA proves this, it takes the magic out of the story. It turns a miracle into a medical checkup, and that is putting it lightly. It would challenge the idea of her being a saint. It would suggest that the entire history of France was saved by a brain glitch. It brings up an uncomfortable fight between faith and science. If a pill could have cured her, would France have lost the war? It is a massive change to the story. Fake saint remains. Before we dig deeper into the medical theories, we have to talk about the jar. For a long time, the world thought they already had her DNA. The story of that jar is one of the biggest embarrassments in the history of science. It involves a mummy, a cat, and a fake object. It starts in 1867. A jar was found in the attic of a drugstore in Paris. The label on it said it was, "Remains found under the fire where Joan of Arc died." You can imagine the excitement. In that century, France was looking for heroes. They needed a symbol to bring the country together. So when this jar showed up with a burnt human rib and a piece of wood, people lost their minds. The church accepted it as real. The museum put it on display. It became a holy object. There was even a cat bone in there, which made sense to historians back then. In the Middle Ages, people would throw a black cat into a fire during an execution to show the devil was there. It was gross, but it fit the story perfectly. Everyone assumed this was her. But here is the catch. In 2006, a scientist named Philippe Charlier decided to test the bones. He was given permission to use modern tools to see what was inside the jar. He gathered a team of 18 experts. They used carbon dating and looked at the pollen. They were expecting to find wood from the 15th century. But almost immediately, the machine started showing data that did not make sense. First, they used their noses. Charlier hired professional people who smell things for famous perfume companies. They did not smell a burnt body. They smelled vanilla. Getting a vanilla scent from a burnt body is physically impossible. Burnt bodies smell like smoke and carbon. But vanilla comes from a compound produced when wood rots for hundreds of years. That was the first big red flag. Then they looked at the pollen on the wood. If Joan died in the spring, the pollen should match the flowers from that time and place. Instead, they found pine pollen from a tree that was used for mummies in Egypt. The carbon dating proved it for sure. The bones were not from the 15th century. They were from the 3rd century BC. It turns out the objects in the jar were actually pieces of an Egyptian mummy. You are probably wondering why a mummy was in a jar labeled Joan of Arc. Well, it is one of those weird facts that nobody talks about. Long ago, people used mummy powder as medicine. Rich people would eat ground-up mummies to cure stomach aches. A drugstore worker probably had some old mummy parts and mixed them with a random cat bone to make a fake object to sell. The saint in the jar was a fake, and the church had to admit it. This left us back at the start with no bones and no DNA. Royal weaponized girls. This discovery was a huge blow to the old story because it showed people have been trying to make up proof for a long time. Now that the jar is gone, the focus is back on the letters. This is where the story takes a dark turn into conspiracy theories. Some people believe that even if we find the DNA, it will not match a peasant girl. They think it will match a queen. This is called the royal bastard conspiracy. While some scientists look for brain problems, others hope the DNA proves something even more shocking. There has always been a theory that Joan was not a peasant girl at all. The theory says she was actually the secret daughter of Queen Isabeau of Bavaria. Let us look at the logic behind this wild idea. The argument is that the French nobles would never have given an army to a girl who watched sheep. In the 15th century, your social class was everything. A peasant could not just walk into a palace and demand a meeting with the king. It was unheard of. Yet Joan did exactly that. She was given armor, a horse, and thousands of soldiers. Conspiracy theorists say she was trained in war from a young age. They point out that she rode horses like a knight, which takes years of practice. She spoke a fancy version of French that a peasant would not know. She understood where to put big cannons. If this theory is true, Joan was not sent by God. She was a secret princess sent by the family to win back the throne. It is like a spy movie set in the 1400s. They call it Operation Shepherdess. The idea is that the voices were actually secret messages from royal spies. The angels were people giving her orders. Her knowledge of the battlefield was actually reports given to her by the Duke's men. It changes the story from a religious tale to a political puzzle. Now, why does the hair matter for this? If we get the code, we can compare her DNA to the French royal family. We have the DNA of those famous kings. If Joan's markers match the Queen's, history breaks. It would mean the trial and the story of the saint were all a big trick to make the soldiers fight harder. It would mean she was not a martyr for faith, but a victim of a family fight. Most historians say this is not true. The records show her parents were peasants, but without the DNA, the rumors stay alive. Some people think the permission to test the hair is being held back because people are afraid of what they will find. Imagine if the hero of France turns out to be a royal lie. It would be a disaster for the country. Maybe that is why it is so hard to get the tests done. Brainstorm visions. If the royal theory is wrong, we are back to the medical mystery. If she was not a secret princess, she was a teenager hearing voices in the middle of a war. Modern science has a very specific name for that. The medical guess is interesting because it fits the trial notes so well. Joan described hearing voices with a bright light and the sound of bells. She said the voices came from her right side. In modern brain science, hearing voices triggered by a sound like bells is a classic sign of a type of epilepsy. It is not crazy, it is just biology. When the bells rang, the sound waves hit her brain and started a storm in her head. Because she was a religious girl in the Middle Ages, her brain used the words she knew, which were saints. If she lived today, she might hear aliens or spies. Some researchers also think she had a rare condition that gives a person a feeling of total happiness and clarity. Famous writers had this too. They described it as a moment where you understand everything in the world at once. If Joan had this, she would feel more confident than any normal person. It would explain why she was not afraid. She literally had a brain that made her feel like she could not be stopped. She could walk into a battle with arrows flying everywhere because her brain told her she was safe. There is also a theory about tuberculosis from drinking milk that was not clean. This can cause problems in the brain that lead to seeing things. But here's the tricky part for the church. If her visions were just a brain problem or a sickness from milk, does that change her mission? A believer would say that God used the brain problem to talk to her. But a skeptic would say she was just a sick girl who needed a doctor instead of a sword. It takes away the magic and makes the story a tragedy about a girl being used by a king to win a war. When she was not useful anymore, she was thrown away. We have to talk about the end because the way she died is the reason we have so little left to study. The fire was meant to erase every part of her. What if the most famous saint in history was actually a secret princess or just a girl with a brain condition? Tell us your thoughts below and subscribe for more mysteries.